Hi, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jen, and I am a digital artist and small business owner. Over the past year and a half of running my online art shop, I've turned several of my digital illustrations into physical prints that I am able to display on my walls and put up for sale on my online shop. Recently, I've been interested in looking forward to trying out some other paper options for my prints because I've been primarily using the Epson Ultra Premium presentation paper to make my prints at home. So I decided to get a few options to try out, and today I'd like to share what I found and my thoughts on their quality to see which one I'd prefer. But first, before I get into that, I want to share my process for making prints from my digital illustrations here at home, so let's just get right into it. As a digital artist, I use Procreate on my iPad to create all of my artwork and illustrations. I've been using Procreate for many years now, and it is my drawing app of choice and the one that I'm typically recommending. However, if you do not use or have access to Procreate or an iPad, there are other apps that you can use such as Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Fresco, Clip Studio Paint, and plenty of more. Before starting an illustration, I like to set up my canvas and adjust my settings so that if I decide to make a print from my arts, that I can easily do that later on. Here are the settings that I like to use. For the dimensions of the canvas, I like to set the height and width to 3080 pixels at 300 dpi. As you can see, the physical measurements of these dimensions turn out to be about 10.3 inches by 10.3. And this is actually larger than the size that I would print my prints on, but I prefer to have a larger canvas because when you scale something down, you can do it without affecting the quality too much. But when you enlarge digital art, typically what happens is you'll lose some quality and the picture will start to look a little pixelated. I'd also like to mention that these dimensions are for a square print or illustration. This is simply just a choice of preference, but you may change the dimensions of your canvas to fit whatever shape and size that you like to make. Now, as for the color profile, I always work in RGB. The specific profile that I use is Display P3, and I know that typically the rule of thumb for color profiles is to use RGB for viewing on digital screens and CMYK for printing. However, the printer that I use has no problem printing in RGB, and I much prefer the way that the colors look when I use this color profile. Now, at this point, the canvas is all set, and we can now get to the best part of the process, and that's creating the art. This illustration that I'm working on is my entry to the Peachtober Prompt B. And for this illustration, the brushes that I used are Jitterbug, which is a brush from a set that I recently purchased called Liner Library Procreate Brush Set. And I also used a Studio Pen brush for the line work. And to color in everything, I used a Blobby filler, which is also from the Liner Library set that I got. And if you're interested in checking that out, I'll leave a link for where you can find that below. Now, once I have a finished illustration that I like to turn into a print, I will export it as a PNG file. To do this, just click on the Actions button, which is the wrench icon near the top left, then click on Share, then select PNG. Then you should have a pop-up window that will ask you how or where to share image, and I usually just airdrop it to my MacBook. So now with our image and file on our computer, there are two ways that I like to set up my illustrations for printing. Let's start with the first one, which is the Word document method. In a brand new Word document, I will go to the Insert tab in the ribbon, then select Text Box and draw a text box. I will then just create a text box that fits the entire page. Then I'll make sure that I am inside the text box by clicking inside, and then go to the Insert tab in the menu, then go to Pictures and select Picture from File. Now I'll just find wherever I have my image saved, which is the Downloads folder for me since I airdropped the file to myself, and I'll just insert that into the text box. So now the image shows up, but it's a little too big, so I will just double click on it, and on the far right side of the ribbon, I can change the dimensions. I like to make my prints to be about 5 inches by 5 inches, so I'll just input that and change the size. Because I print on letter-sized paper, I can fit 2 of these prints on a single page, so I am just going to copy the image and paste a second one below the first. I like to leave a space in between the 2 images because my paper cutter, which I will use later on to cut my prints, isn't the most accurate, but you can leave out that space if you have a more precise cutting tool or technique so that you have less cuts to make. Now, I want to show you a second way for setting up your illustrations for prints, which I call the Canva method. In Canva, we're going to start with making a new design. You can do this by clicking on Create a Design in the top right corner and selecting a template that has 8.5 by 11 inch dimensions, or you can create a custom size and input those exact same dimensions. I'm just going to select the flyer portrait from the templates. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is upload my image from my Downloads folder into Canva. Then I'll just add it to my page and size it down to 5 inches by 5 inches by dragging one of the corners in. Then I'll duplicate it so that I can fit the 2 prints per page, and once I'm done, I can click on Share to download the file as a PDF to my computer so that I can then print. Now, I'd like to mention that these prints will have no border and will print the image edge to edge. So if you want to have a specific size white border on your print, you can make that here by adding in a white square. When you do this, you also want to change the background color so you can see the white square and see what you're doing. And also make sure to give the square that you added in a colored line border so that you have a guide for cutting later on. And then size the square to whatever size you want the whole print to be. In this example, I'm just going to use 5 by 5. Then make sure to place your illustration on top of the square and scale that down to fit inside the white border. And lastly, I just like to group these 2 layers together so that I can move them around, and then just duplicate that again so that I can fit the 2 prints. Finally, just make sure to change the background back to white or download with a transparent background so that you can avoid using any ink for the whole page. Whether I use the Word document method or the Canva method for setting up my page for printing, my printer settings will be the same. When I am ready to print, here are the settings that I like to use for my Epson EcoTank 2850 inkjet printer. On my computer, in the Systems dialog, I have a printing preset that I made that I actually use for all of my prints. So let me show you the settings that I've adjusted and customized. If you scroll down inside your system dialogs to the printer options, you'll see the print settings. Here, I select premium presentation paper matte for the media type and high quality for the print quality. Then, still inside the printer options, you'll see the color options. Here, I like to select manual settings, and under advanced settings, I have the mode set to Epson Vivid, and I like to bump the contrast up to 10, and also bump up the cyan, magenta, and yellow color options to 10 as well. And those are the only settings that I like to adjust. And please note that these are settings that I found through my own trial and error, and these exact settings may not work for other printers or color profiles, but I hope that by giving you this information that you'll have a nice starting point to figure out what will work for you. Now, on the printer, when you load your paper in, you'll be prompted to select the paper size, which in this case will be letter, and the paper type, which will be premium presentation. At this point, we are all set and ready to go to send the file to print, so we can just let the printer do its thing. Once the illustrations are fully printed, there are a couple of ways that you can cut them down to your specific size. One method is to use a ruler and a cutting knife to cut out each of your prints. This method is typically more precise, but just make sure to use some sort of cutting mat underneath to protect your workstation or desk. And also please be careful and be mindful of your fingers. The other method, and the method that I actually prefer, is to use a paper cutter or a guillotine. My paper cutter isn't the most precise, but I do my best to align the edges as close as possible. And again, when you're using any paper cutter, any sharp knives or anything like that, just make sure to be careful and watch where you place your hands and fingers. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I am testing out new paper today. The options that I have here today in order from cheapest and thinnest to most expensive and thickest are the Epson Ultra Premium Presentation Paper in Matte, the Moab LaSalle Photo Matte Paper, Epson Velvet Fine Art Paper, and finally, the Hanamule Fine Art Paper. Let's start with the Epson Ultra Premium Matte Presentation Paper. This is my control paper, or the paper that I'm used to, because it is the one that I've used since the launch of my shop. Of the papers that I'm trying today, this is the smoothest, as well as the thinnest and lightest at 192 GSM, and it comes out to be about 40 cents per sheet. I've liked this paper because of its affordability, but now that my shop is continuing to grow, I would like to see if there's a better, higher quality paper that I'd like to use instead. Next, we have the Moab LaSalle Photo Matte Paper. This paper is slightly thicker and heavier at 235 GSM, and the paper is quite smooth to the touch, and it comes out to be about 80 cents per sheet. I like that this paper can be printed on both sides, and it definitely feels sturdier than the Ultra Premium paper. Then we have the Epson Velvet Fine Art Paper. This paper has a nice texture to it, and it feels thick, and it is heavier at 260 GSM. It comes out to be about $2 per sheet, and it just feels like a better version of the Ultra Premium paper that I've been using. I do like that it is heavier and sturdier, and that is something that I'm really looking for in the paper that I want to use. And finally, we have the Hanamule Fine Art Paper. This paper also has a really nice texture feel to it, and it is the thickest and heaviest paper that I have here today at 308 GSM. This paper comes out to be about $2.20 per sheet, and it is the most expensive paper that I'm testing. This paper definitely feels and looks like higher quality, but the paper is slightly just too thick for my printer. I kept having problems taking the paper, and the printer kept giving me an error message that the paper was jamming, and it only worked when I guided the paper in by hand. Also, I did have to change the settings slightly for this paper when I was printing. I had to bump the colors up to 20% because with my normal settings, the colors came out quite muted. Now, to compare the print quality among the papers that I have here today, I found that they all printed very well. Nothing looked fuzzy or blurry, and the image on all printed very well. As for the color quality, there is slight variation among the prints, even though that I use the same setting for all except for the Hanamule paper like I mentioned before. It may be hard to see through video, but in person, it looks like both of the Epson papers printed the colors quite similarly, whereas the colors on the Moab and the Hanamule appear slightly darker in certain areas. I think personally, after looking at these options, I find myself preferring the Moab Photo Matte Paper and the Epson Velvet Fine Art Paper, and my reasoning for that is because the Ultra Premium paper is just too thin and the Hanamule is too thick. So to compare the final two options that I like, I printed another illustration that had much darker colors to see how they would look. And after looking at these two options, I think that I prefer the Epson Velvet Fine Art paper because the colors are most similar to the original digital illustration. On the Moab paper, the colors appear to be too blue and slightly brighter than what I am actually looking for. So for me, going forward, I think I'm probably going to choose the Epson Velvet Fine Art paper to make my prints at home to put up on my shop. And that is my process for making prints at home and my thoughts on testing these different types of art papers. I hope that you may have found this video interesting and helpful. And if you did, please consider leaving me a like. I hope that you have a super amazing, fun week ahead of you. Thank you so much for watching and making it to the end. It really means so much to me, and so I appreciate you very much.